At 4:47 in the afternoon, after sitting in a plastic chair near the admissions window for 6 hours and 20 minutes, Reid Carter had not been offered so much as a glass of water by anyone with a badge. He had watched 29 employees pass within arm's reach of him since 9 that morning. Not one had asked his name. Then Alan Marsh came through the lobby doors at a pace that was almost a run, carrying a leather binder against his chest, and called across the room in a voice that reached every corner of it. "Mr. Carter, sir, I need you to look at these before the board session closes." The room did not go quiet all at once, it went quiet in sections. Meridian Health Group operated 7 hospitals across 4 states in the Southeast. Reid Carter had built it over 22 years from a single rural clinic he had purchased with a loan and a handshake from a bank that no longer existed. He was 51 years old, and in those 22 years he had never once put his photograph on a wall inside any building he owned. He did not give keynote addresses. He did not attend ribbon cuttings unless the community had specifically asked him to. He answered his own phone until 11 in the morning and his own email until 9 at night, and he had a standing policy of visiting each facility in the network at least twice a year without announcing himself in advance. The reasoning behind it was not modesty, though people sometimes mistook it for that. It was methodology. A hospital could perform excellently when it knew it was being evaluated. What interested Reid was how it performed when it believed no one important was watching. The difference between those 2 states was the actual condition of the institution. Harwell Regional Medical Center had been part of Meridian for 4 years. It was the 2nd largest facility in the network, with 412 beds and a staff of just under 1,800. Its quarterly numbers had been consistently strong. Its patient satisfaction scores had dropped 11 points in 14 months. 3 medical supply vendors had not renewed their contracts in the past year and a half. When Reid's operations team had called 2 of them to ask why, both had used language so similar it seemed almost coordinated, saying only that they had found their time better spent elsewhere and that there had been nothing wrong with the actual work. Reid had seen that pattern once before, at a different facility, and he knew what it meant before he finished reading the summary. He booked a visit to Harwell on a Tuesday morning, 14 days out, through the standard administrative calendar. He used his real name. He listed the purpose as an operational review. He gave no title, no assistant, and no indication of his role in the organization. He wore dark slacks and a gray pullover when he arrived, parked in the visitor lot on the south end of the property, and walked through the main entrance at 8:52 with a small notebook and a thermos. The Harwell lobby had been renovated 3 years prior. The floor was polished to a mirror finish. A long reception desk of pale birch and brushed steel ran the length of one wall. 6 upholstered chairs in navy blue faced a low table stacked with health magazines. There was a security checkpoint between the lobby and the elevator bank, staffed continuously, because the facility handled pediatric and maternity cases and had tightened its visitor protocols accordingly. The Meridian name appeared in raised steel letters above the reception desk. Brenda Hollis worked the reception desk that morning. She had been at Harwell for 3 years, and she was efficient in the specific way that institutional front desks produced efficiency, which was to say she moved people through the intake process quickly and sorted them into categories with almost no visible deliberation. She looked at Reid when he came through the door, registered the gray pullover and the thermos, and finished what she was typing before she acknowledged him. "Good morning," Reid said. "I have a 9 o'clock. Carter, Reid Carter." Brenda typed it. She waited. She typed it again. "I'm not pulling anything up," she said. "What department is the appointment with?" "Administration. It should be on the main calendar." She checked the administrative calendar, which showed 2 scheduled reviews and a department head meeting for the morning. She did not see how the man in front of her fit into any of it. She looked at the thermos. She looked at the pullover. "I don't have you listed," she said. "Can I ask the nature of your visit?" "Operational review," Reid said. Brenda wrote his name on the paper visitor log because the protocol required it and slid the clipboard back. "Take a seat and I'll send a message upstairs. Someone will come down." Reid sat in the chair nearest the window, which looked out on the ambulance bay. The clock on the wall behind the reception desk read 8:58. What happened next took less than 90 seconds. Brenda sent a message to the office of Gary Nolan, the facility administrator. His assistant, a woman named Diane Cruz, read it between two other things, and replied that there was no 9 o'clock on the calendar and to have the visitor wait. She did not cross-reference the full system or check for pending entries. The appointment Reid had placed on the administrative calendar 14 days prior had been moved to a holding status by Diane 4 days after it was submitted, because the name attached to it matched nothing in her contact database, and she had a habit of clearing the calendar of what she called floaters before each week began. The appointment still existed. It had simply ceased to be visible to anyone who might have acted on it. By 9:15, the lobby had filled and begun to empty as the shift change moved people through the elevators. Reid watched it. He counted the badge colors and noted which staff paused at the desk and which moved straight to the checkpoint. A man in a sport coat arrived at 9:20 with no appointment listed that Brenda could find, mentioned the name of a pharmaceutical company, and had a visitor badge in his hand in under 3 minutes. A woman in scrubs who identified herself as a home health aide from a smaller regional provider arrived at 9:35, asked about a supply coordination meeting, and was told to call the department number posted on the board behind the desk. She copied it into her phone and left without a badge, without a callback promise, without anyone writing her name down. Reid wrote both transactions in his notebook. He was not yet drawing conclusions, he was collecting data. A security officer named Harold Vick had been working the checkpoint since 7. He was a compact, deliberate man in his late 50s who had come to hospital security after 20 years with the county sheriff's department, and he had a practiced eye for the difference between someone who was lost and someone who was waiting with a purpose. He had noted Reid when he came in and had noted that he was still there at 9:45. He did not approach because the man was seated, calm, and clearly not causing any difficulty, and in Harold's experience, interrupting a man who was quietly waiting was rarely the right call. At 10:10, a woman named Christine Beaumont came through the lobby with a rolling cart of supply samples. She worked for a company called Apex Diagnostic Supply and had a scheduled meeting on the 4th floor. Brenda found her name immediately and issued a badge without hesitation. Reid watched Christine Beaumont get into the elevator. Then he opened his notebook and wrote down the time. He had not come to Harwell expecting what he found in that lobby before noon. He had expected a scheduling breakdown. He had expected a management communication problem. What he was watching was something that operated well below the level of management. It was a filter, and it ran on visible signals, and none of the people running it appeared to know they were running anything at all. At 11:20, Brenda looked up from her screen and told him she still had nothing from upstairs, and that he was welcome to leave his contact information and they would be in touch. Reid told her he would continue to wait. She went back to her screen. His phone rang at 11:35. It was Alan Marsh, his chief financial officer, calling from the corporate office in Atlanta. "The board materials are done," Alan said. "I need wet signatures on the capital disbursement package before the Thursday session closes. All 3 project approvals and the equipment lease extension." Reid asked how much time they had. "Thursday session closes at 5. If I courier the package to you tonight, I can have it back by noon tomorrow, but I'd rather not cut it that close. There are 11 line items, and the board chair already pushed this cycle twice." Reid told him to prepare the package and hold it. He would handle the timing from his end. He ended the call and set the phone face down on his knee. He had not intended to still be in that lobby at 5 o'clock. He had not intended to be there past noon, but somewhere between the home health aide with her copied phone number and the pharmaceutical representative with his badge in 3 minutes, his purpose for the visit had shifted. He was not going to learn what he had come to learn by leaving at noon with 2 hours of notes. He was going to learn it by staying until the building had fully decided what to do with him. He understood what the staying would cost him. The longer he waited without an appointment being confirmed, the more the waiting itself would become evidence against him. The building would develop a story about who he was based on the fact of his presence and the absence of anyone claiming him. He had no control over what that story became. He was prepared to let it run. By 12:30, he had become invisible in the way that only a very still person in an institutional setting becomes invisible, which was completely. 2 nurses ate lunch at the far end of the seating area and talked for 20 minutes without acknowledging that another human being was seated 8 feet away. A facilities manager walked through the lobby 3 times pushing a supply cart and looked through him each time with the easy inattention of a man moving through familiar space. The blue chair had become part of the furniture. He was watching this when a young woman in green scrubs stopped beside him with a bottle of water. Her name badge said Sophie Wren, and below it the word volunteer in smaller type. She was somewhere in her mid-20s and moved with the slightly too deliberate care of someone who had not yet learned to be casual in a hospital. "You've been here since before my shift started," she said. "Since 8:52, Reid said. "That's not right." She glanced toward the reception desk. "Do you want me to go up and ask about your appointment directly? I can find the administrative floor." "You'd be doing it on your own initiative," Reid said, "not because anyone told you to." "Yes. Go ahead if you're willing." Sophie went to the desk first and spoke to Brenda briefly. Reid could not hear the exchange, but he could read it well enough. Brenda told her it was being handled. Sophie's expression did not change, but she went to the elevator instead of back to her station, which meant she had decided to interpret being handled as something she could help with. She was upstairs for 11 minutes. She came back with her jaw slightly set and told Reid that the administrator's office had said the appointment was not in the system and that he was welcome to reschedule. "Thank you," Reid said. "I'm sorry," she meant it without theater. "Don't be, you did everything right." She went back to her station. Reid added her name to his notebook. At 1:45, he heard himself described for the first time. A patient coordinator named Jill Frazier was telling someone at the desk that the man in the blue chair had been there since morning, and the other woman said he was probably working his way into a physician access meeting, because that was something pharmaceutical reps did when they were not getting traction through the normal channels. Nobody in the exchange considered that a third possibility existed. Reid added Jill Frazier's name to his notebook and noted the time. At 2:15, Gary Nolan's deputy administrator, a man named Brian Kessler, came through the lobby on his way somewhere and stopped because he recognized the dynamic of a waiting room problem and wanted to resolve it before it created a formal complaint. He asked Reid whether he had been helped. Reid told him about the 9 o'clock. Brian Kessler looked at his watch. "I'll have someone follow up," he said, with the polished neutrality of a man who had delivered that sentence many times. He did not write anything down. He did not take Reid's name. He did not look at the visitor log sitting 2 feet from where Brenda was working. Reid wrote it all down. At 2:40, a man named Ray Tully came through the main entrance carrying a sample case and a manila folder. Ray Tully was 56 and had run Tully Medical Provisions for 21 years. He supplied sterile packaging materials and minor instrument trays to 3 of Meridian's facilities, and had been a vendor to Harwell specifically for 7 of those years. He had a 2:30 appointment with the materials procurement office to discuss a contract renewal. Brenda found his name in the system. She told him procurement was running behind and to have a seat. Ray sat down 2 chairs from Reid and put the sample case on his knees. He looked at Reid the way a man looks at another man in the same waiting room, with a brief recognition of shared circumstance. "How long?" Ray asked. "Since 9. Ray exhaled through his nose. He turned the sample case over in his hands. "I've been coming here 7 years, he said. "Used to be I'd check in and Mike from procurement would meet me at the desk before I had time to sit down." "What changed?" Reid asked. Ray thought about it honestly, which was more than anyone with a badge had managed all day. "The work didn't change. We run clean. No back orders, no billing disputes, nothing. What changed is they brought in a new procurement director 18 months ago, and now everything goes through a vendor portal, and the portal doesn't recognize my product codes because my company is too small to have a dedicated EDI system." He looked at the sample case. "I've submitted the renewal twice. Got 1 auto reply asking me to reformat the attachment." Reid asked if other vendors in his category had experienced the same. "I know 3 who stopped calling," Ray said. "Nobody made a fuss about it. You just stopped sending emails into a void at some point." A coordinator came down at 3:15 and spoke to Ray for less than 2 minutes. She gave him a printed sheet with a vendor portal URL and a phone number for the procurement line, and told him the renewal could be submitted online. Ray looked at the sheet for a moment, thanked her with the particular courtesy of a man who had learned that courtesy cost him nothing, and anger cost him a contract, and walked out. Reid sat with that for a long time after the door closed. He had come to Harwell because the satisfaction numbers were dropping, and because vendors were going quiet. He had spent the morning treating his own experience in that lobby as the subject of the investigation. It was not the subject. It was one instance of the mechanism. Every hour he had been in that chair, the building had been doing to other people exactly what it was doing to him. And those people, the home health aide, Ray Tully, the 3 vendors who had stopped calling, did not own the facility and could not afford to wait it out with a notebook. They had simply left. 7 years of Ray Tully had walked out the front door with a URL on a printed sheet, and it had not generated a single alert in any system. He changed what he was collecting at 3:15. He was no longer building a record of personal mistreatment, which was trivial and which he had never much cared about. He was building a map of the mechanism, who had designed the filter, who operated it daily without naming it, who had built a culture in which sorting people by appearance and affiliation was experienced not as a policy but as ordinary professional judgment. He intended to find all of them. At 4:10, a physical therapist named Derek Payne came down with 2 colleagues and stood near the checkpoint laughing about something. Derek glanced at the man in the blue chair, leaned toward the taller of the 2 colleagues and said something with his hand near his mouth, and all 3 of them looked over at once before they went out the front doors. Derek did not go far. He came back at 4:30 alone and positioned himself near the water station at the far end of the lobby. He raised his phone. The photo was taken at 4:13 and entered the staff group chat at 4:17 with a caption Derek Payne apparently found clever. Within 18 minutes, there were 14 replies. Reid did not see the caption. He would read it in full 26 days later, during the forensic review of the facility's communication records. Between 4:30 and 4:50, 4 separate employees came through the lobby with no visible purpose and left without stopping at the desk or the checkpoint. 2 of them looked at Reid directly before they turned around. None of them spoke to him. Reid counted everyone and added them to the notebook. Harold Vick came off his position at 4:55 and walked over. He stopped a measured distance from the chair and kept his hands at his sides. "Sir," he said, "I've been asked to let you know that the lobby closes to non-patient visitors at 5. The request is coming from administration." Reid told him he understood. Harold did not move immediately. "I want to be straight with you. I don't know what's happening with your appointment, but the way this has gone today doesn't sit right with me. You came in at 9 with a name and a time, and nobody's come down in 7 hours to sort it out. That's not something I can fix from where I'm standing, but I wanted you to know I see it." "I appreciate that," Reid said. "What's your name?" "Harold Vick." Reid wrote it in his notebook. Harold nodded once and walked back to the checkpoint. It was 4:58 when the front doors opened again. Alan Marsh came through at 4:59 in a suit that had been in a car for 2 hours, carrying a leather binder pressed to his chest. He had finalized the capital disbursement package at noon, spent the early afternoon trying to arrange a courier, and at 3 o'clock had decided that the board chair's patience had limits that a courier schedule did not respect. He had called Reid's office, been told the owner was at Harwell Regional, and driven it himself. The board session closed at 5. He had 11 line items, 3 project authorizations, and an equipment lease extension that required a signature from one specific person, and only that person, with ink on paper. He came through the doors at a controlled walk that was nearly a run, and he did not stop at the reception desk because he had already located the gray pullover across the lobby. Mr. Carter. The name carried the full length of the room. He set the binder on the low table beside Reid's chair and opened it. "Sir, I need your signatures on the capital package. The board session closes in 1 hour." The lobby did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet in sections. Brenda Hollis stopped with her hand on the keyboard. The 2 nurses at the far table looked up at the same moment. Derek Payne, who had come back down at 4:40 to collect something from the checkpoint and had not yet left the building, stopped 4 feet from the elevator with his coat halfway on. Harold Vick turned from his post. Sophie Wren, who had returned for the afternoon rotation, put down the folder she was holding. Reid stood. He read the first authorization sheet the way he read every document, which was completely and without hurry. It took 4 minutes. Nobody in the lobby moved in any direction that resembled casual. He signed each page where it required a signature, initialed the margin notation on the equipment lease, and handed the binder back to Alan. "Photograph every page before you pull out of the lot," Reid said. "Send the images to the board's secretary so the submission is confirmed before you're on the highway." Alan said yes, sir, and left at a pace that did not conceal anything. The name moved through the room the way a current moves through a system, not as a sound but as a fact arriving all at once. Reid Carter, not a visitor with an unverifiable appointment, not a pharmaceutical representative working an angle, the sole owner and founding chairman of Meridian Health Group, the parent organization of Harwell Regional Medical Center, the man whose signature had just authorized 11 capital line items covering equipment that sat in every imaging suite and operating theater in the building, including the paychecks of the 14 people who had replied to the photograph in the group chat. He did not raise his voice. He picked up his notebook, capped his pen, and looked at the clock above Brenda's desk. It read 5:03. "I'd like the facility administrator in his conference room," Reid said to the room. 15 minutes, nobody adjusts a calendar or sends a message until I say so. He made one call before he moved from the chair. It went to the corporate operations desk and lasted 35 seconds. It froze administrative editing access to the Harwell facility calendar. It also flagged the communications archive for a full pull going back 16 months. Gary Nolan came down at 5:14 with his jacket half on, and Diane Cruz 2 steps behind him, already speaking an apology that grew more elaborate as he crossed the lobby floor. Reid did not extend his hand. He said upstairs, and they rode the elevator without conversation. The conference room on the 4th floor had a window that looked down on the ambulance bay. Reid asked Nolan to close the door and to sit. 4 things are already in place, Reid said. The administrative calendar is locked at the corporate level and cannot be edited from this building. The visitor log from this morning stays on that counter and does not leave it. The lobby camera footage from 8:45 this morning through 5 tonight is being pulled now, and the full communications archive for this facility, every channel, going back 16 months. Gary Nolan said he would need to understand the scope before anything was formally committed. "You don't have anything to commit," Reid said. "I'm telling you it's already done." Diane Cruz understood before Nolan had finished his response. She had been the one to move the appointment 4 days prior, and she knew what a communications archive would find because she also participated in the group chat and knew exactly what had been posted to it that afternoon. Alan Marsh called at 5:52. The board submission had cleared with 4 minutes to spare. Reid asked him to come back in the morning with Karen Steele from Corporate Human Resources and an outside investigator. When he called Karen directly, he told her to bring a forensic communications reviewer. She asked what she was looking for. A system, not a bad day. The investigation ran 22 days, and it was thorough in the way that only an investigation with full archive access can be. The calendar data showed that Reid's appointment had been moved to a suspended status by Diane Cruz on the Thursday before the visit. Underneath it, the audit found 48 other appointments in pending or suspended status over the previous 16 months. In 41 of them, the submitting party had no recognizable company affiliation or no listed title. 3 had been restored after follow-up calls. The other 38 had expired without action. The visitor log told the same story in ink. Reid's name sat at the top of that morning's page, entered in his own handwriting at 8:58 with a note about the administrative office. The log had been active all day. Brenda Hollis had processed 43 other visitors in the time his name sat there. Not one person had turned the page and compared it against anything. The camera footage gave the investigation its hardest numbers. In 6 hours and 11 minutes before Alan Marsh arrived, 29 badged employees had passed within 6 feet of the man in the blue chair. 8 had looked at him directly. 4 had come down from upper floors between 4:30 and 4:50 with no logged destination. 0 had checked his name against any record in any system. The communications archive was where the investigation stopped being about negligence and became something else. Derek Payne's photograph was there, time-stamped and captioned. The 14 replies were there. The forensic review went further back and found that the photograph was not the first of its kind. There were 6 prior instances across 14 months. A supply driver photographed from a second-floor window in February. A home health coordinator described by the color of her lanyard in a thread that ran 32 messages long. A recurring pattern of commentary about the type of person who came through the main entrance rather than arriving on a company's scheduled calendar. Some of the threads had managers in them. The vendor records provided the damage number. Karen Steele's team contacted every partner who had gone dormant at Harwell over 3 years and started making calls. What came back was not a complaint file. It was a list of companies that had quietly rerouted their business without filing a single grievance. 11 vendors had stopped renewing. When asked directly, most said that the work itself had never been an issue, that the administrative process had become increasingly difficult to navigate, and that at some point they had determined their time was better placed with accounts where someone picked up the phone. Nobody quits loud. They just stop calling. Reid read the full report on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks and 1 day after the visit. He sat with it closed in front of him for close to an hour, thinking about Ray Tully walking out through the front doors with a vendor portal URL on a printed sheet and 7 years of clean loads behind him. Then he opened it and went to work, because he had learned that the hour immediately after a difficult report was not the right time to make decisions, and because 1,800 people at Harwell Regional were depending on him to make correct ones. Gary Nolan was terminated, not for the appointment he had never seen, and not for the photograph he had not taken. The archive showed that the practice of photographing lobby visitors had been reported to him once, in writing, in an exit interview he had personally conducted with a departing front desk employee 8 months prior. He had acknowledged the report. He had delivered 4 strong quarters on top of it and done nothing else. Reid told him that directly in the same 4th-floor conference room, with no one else in the room. Nolan talked about the numbers for 17 minutes. He talked about volume, about margin, about what it cost to run a facility at this scale in a market that did not reward sentiment. Reid let him finish all of it. "You had 4 years and a full building," Reid said. "In 6 hours, 29 of your people walked past a man with his name written on your own log, and not one of them checked it. That's not the market. That's what you taught them was safe to do." Diane Cruz was terminated. The audit established that she had made the same unilateral judgment about incoming appointments hundreds of times, deciding on her own assessment who was substantial enough to reach the administrator's calendar. She said correctly that nobody had ever told her not to. Reid told her, also correctly, that nobody should have needed to. Derek Payne was terminated for the photograph and for the 14 months of communication history behind it. Jill Frazier received a formal written review and was removed from her patient coordinator role pending a performance reassessment. 14 employees who had participated in the archive threads received formal disciplinary records scaled to their individual level of participation, and each of them sat through a review session with Karen Steele's team. Brenda Hollis was not fired. The investigation had considered it. She had been the first point of failure, had not opened the pending queue, had not turned the visitor log around. By the letter of the findings, the grounds were there. When the investigator interviewed her, she did not defend herself, did not attribute the decision to a busy desk or a broken system, and did not say that she had simply followed the procedure as she understood it. She said that she had looked at a man in a gray pullover holding a thermos and had made a determination about him in approximately 3 seconds, and that she had been making that same determination for 3 years without once calling it what it was. Reid read that interview twice. He kept her. He restructured her role to include visitor intake training for the department, which was a different outcome from leaving her in place unchanged, and he told her privately that the only reason the decision came out the way it did was that she had been willing to say the true sentence when saying it cost her something. Everyone else involved in the day had spent 3 weeks explaining. She had not explained anything. Sophie Wren was made permanent before the investigation formally closed. The camera footage had recorded all of it. The water at 9:15, the second check-in before noon, the 11 minutes she had spent on the upper floors on her own initiative after being told the matter was handled. She was assigned to the newly created Visitor Experience Working Group, which meant that the newest person in the building ended up helping design the procedure that staff with a decade of tenure would be required to follow. Harold Vick kept his post. The record showed he had been directed by administration to ask a visitor to leave, had delivered that message with accuracy and basic respect, had extended the timeline as far as he reasonably could, and had been the only badged employee in 6 hours to ask the man in the blue chair his name and write the answer somewhere it would not disappear. Reid told him that the note on the back of his hand was the only correctly executed act in the building on that particular day. The process rebuild took 8 weeks and was deliberately unglamorous. Suspended calendar status was eliminated from the system entirely. replaced by a queue that required a written reason and a named responsible contact for every incoming appointment not confirmed within 24 hours. Any visitor waiting longer than 20 minutes without being received generated an automatic notification to a floor supervisor, who was required to close it manually with a documented response. The visitor log went digital and cross-referenced in real time against the active calendar, so that a name entered at the desk surfaced in the system regardless of whether anyone at the desk thought to look. The communications archive was rebuilt under full retention rules with quarterly review by an external auditor. Before any of the partner outreach calls went out, Reid placed one himself. He called Ray Tully from his office in Atlanta on a Thursday morning with no assistant on the line. He told Ray who he was. Then he told Ray that he had been sitting 2 chairs away in the Harwell lobby on the afternoon of the visit and had watched 7 years of Tully Medical Provisions walk out the door with a vendor portal URL after a 40-minute wait. Ray was quiet on the other end of the line for a while. The contract renewal was signed the following week at the terms Ray Tully had originally submitted, in a meeting at the Harwell procurement office with the new procurement lead present. The meeting started on time, and someone came down to the lobby to meet Ray at the desk. The all-facility meeting at Harwell happened on a Tuesday morning, standing in the main corridor of the first floor, because Reid did not want a stage. He spoke for 9 minutes. He did not describe what the day had felt like, and he did not use the word humiliation. He put Derek Payne's photograph on a screen at the end of the corridor and left it there while he talked. He talked about numbers: 29 employees, 6 hours, 0 verifications, 11 vendors gone in 3 years with no formal complaint filed by any of them, because the people this facility had trained itself to overlook were also the people least likely to report being overlooked. "Every one of you verifies a lot code on a supply shipment," he said. "You confirm a patient wristband against a chart before you administer anything. You will not release a medication without checking the record twice. And you're right not to. Then a person walks through the front door and you verify nothing at all, and you decide in 3 seconds who they are and what their time is worth. That is the failure. Not a scheduling error, not a rude comment, a building that holds freight to one standard and holds people to none." He told them the facility's performance targets had not changed and were not going to be adjusted as an apology. Then he told them that no quarterly result produced inside that building would protect a manager who ran it the way it had been run, and that he would close a profitable facility before he would defend one. Nothing about the way he operated changed after that visit. He still traveled without announcement. He still kept his photograph off the walls at every location, and his title off his business cards, and he never once suggested that having the staff recognize the owner's face would solve anything, because it would only teach 7 buildings to be careful around one particular face. What changed was smaller than that, and it was permanent. At the top of the visitor reception protocol, above the badge steps and the log entry requirements and the 20-minute alert procedure, on a laminated card posted at every Meridian reception desk in 7 facilities across 4 states, there was now a single line printed before any other instruction. "Every person who walks through this door is treated with full respect before we know who they are. Appearance is not a measure of a person's value. This building only becomes genuinely strong when it holds that standard without exception, for the owner, for the client, and for the unknown figure sitting in the lobby with no one who thinks to ask his name.